This is another iRaw podcast. We podcast to make the world a better place for animals.
This is the Talking Animal Law podcast, brought to you every 2 weeks by the UK Centre for Animal Law and hosted by Paula Sparks, Director of A-Law. But it's not just for lawyers, it's for anyone who cares about animals. So no matter who you are, if you want to know more about animal protection, news, ethics and animal law reform, then this is the podcast for you.
Hello and welcome everyone to the first podcast of 2024. One that I'm particularly excited about because we're talking this morning to Claire Bass, who is the Senior Director of Campaigns and Public Affairs at Humane Society International-UK and has been working in animal protection for around 2 decades, with recent significant involvement in the successful passage of the Animal Welfare Sentience Act. Claire is also chair of the Animal Welfare Strategy Group in a UK NGO umbrella body, Wildlife and Countryside Link, and was a lead author and strategist on a joint third sector campaign to government to secure the best possible deal for animals in the course of the UK's exit from the European Union. And for anyone who doesn't know that much about Humane Society International and its partner organisations, together they constitute one of the world's largest animal protection organisations in the globe. And for more than 20 years, HSI has been working for the protection of all animals through the use of science, advocacy, education and hands-on programmes. So they have been celebrating animals and confronting cruelty worldwide. And today we are going to be talking to Claire about her New Year's wish list for animals. And it's a discussion that I'm really looking forward to. So Claire, hello, and thank you for coming to talk to us today about your New Year's wish list. I've been really looking forward to talking to you on this topic.
Oh, hello, Paula. Lovely to be chatting to you. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
It's a complete pleasure. And we're starting the year with some good news because you've already had what I know has been one of your wishes come true. And that's this new law in South Korea banning the sale of dog meat. So do you want to start by just telling us a bit more about HSI's part in this? And who else you've been working with to end this cruel practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. And yes, this is really kind of all of our Christmas wishes for multiple years come true. It's one of those victories that you almost don't dare imagine could happen. And then when it does, it's a real pinch me moment. So yeah, South Korea's passing the ban on farming and selling dogs for their meat. Just at the very start of the year was a phenomenal victory. So it's the culmination of almost 10 years campaigning by HSI and a real testament to the tenacity of our team in South Korea, HSI Korea. And the stellar cast of partners that they work with. So there's some really, really powerful and talented animal activists in Korea who've made this happen. With backing from HSI globally and all our amazing supporters. And interestingly, the question about who have we been working with? I think one of the sort of surprising answers on this, and some a group of people that have really been critical to getting this ban passed is actually dog meat farmers themselves.
Okay.
Which sounds like a bit of a surprising kind of bedfellow to have in that campaign. And we know, that when we're sort of battling against big, powerful animal industries, it can be a sort of relentless uphill struggle. But when those people join the call for change, it can be, transformative to the campaign. So we worked with farmers who wanted to get out of the trade and who knew that that there was a dying trade, that demand was dwindling, that it wasn't economically lucrative anymore, and who wanted to close their farms but didn't have a way out. And so we helped them with our Models for Change program to get out and to move into a new livelihood. And And that really, showed the South Korean government a model for saying, it's not just animal activists that want this, it's actually the dog meat industry, or significant parts of the dog meat industry who want it as well. And that in combination with the Korean president and his wife, who have rescued dogs, and obviously couldn't reconcile their relationships with their dogs with the suffering that we exposed, on the dog meat farms. All just came together in that moment when the stars aligned. So it's amazing.
Oh, it's really amazing news. And I heard being concerned about a backlash from traders. There was some media coverage of this towards the end of last year, but what you're describing actually perhaps holds out more hope that there will be effective implementation and enforcement of this law. So is that your feeling as well on the ground?
Yeah, we're very, very optimistic that this will work, this law, largely because the ban has been put in place by the government following extensive consultation, including with the dog meat traders and industry. And part of what that consultation led to was the 3-year phase-in, which is not at all uncommon with laws of this kind of magnitude, where they have a potential economic impact on livelihoods. And so the 3-year phase-in allows time for the government to support registered dog meat farmers and traders to be moved into new livelihoods, and that really reduces massively, we think, the threat of a legal challenge, because we do believe it is constitutionally watertight. So the next steps is that there'll be an expert committee is going to be formed. We hope that HSI Korea will get a seat on that, and that committee will advise the government on a responsible phase out plan, responsible to both the farmers and the dogs, to make sure that as much suffering is alleviated and as many dogs can be rescued as possible. So yeah, we're hugely excited and looking forward to working with the government on the next steps.
Oh, well done. And if we turn to the UK now, what's on the top of your wish list for this year? What are the big asks of the political parties, or what do you want to see on party manifestos? I know it's a really broad question. What's the top priorities?
How long have you got? We make this a 3-hour podcast. Yeah, no, I mean, we've been thinking about this obviously in the run up to this election year that we're in now. We've been thinking about this for a good while, and we've been talking. HSI has been talking to dozens of organisations across the animal protection sector to try to see if we can coalesce around some sort of key issues that will we can jointly prioritise, that will prevent the suffering of millions of animals. And and I think it's important to say that we know from various polls that we've done that these issues really resonate with voters from all political persuasions. So it's not just our sort of ask to parties is not please do this because it's a kind altruistic thing to do for animals, but it's actually this could matter to your candidates on the doorstep. And we know, for example, that almost 1 in 10 voters rank whether or not a party will protect animals from cruelty as one of the top 3 most important policies that will influence their vote. And that's including everything, including massive things like the NHS and and food prices and things. So it is important to people, and we are getting that message through to parties. But in terms of the actual priorities for what we're asking for, we've got some themes that we're sort of, as I said, trying to sort of coalesce around, and I can run through 1 or 2 of them if that would be.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So one really big one is moving away from intensive farming, and obviously that's in terms of numbers, if you're looking at it from a numbers game, that's really the biggest problem that we have, is intensive farming, billions of animals suffering and being killed, to end up on dinner tables. And so we we want the next government to end the cage age. That's a really big priority. So getting rid of, battery enriched cages and farrowing crates for pigs. And we want more than that, commitment to a food and farming strategy that really speeds up the UK's trip down the hill from peak meat. Because meat consumption has been falling. It's fallen around but I think something between 15 and 20% in the last decade. But it needs to go further and it needs to go faster. And the National Food Strategy was very clear that we've got to aim for at least 30% in the next 10 years. So we want, a really big priority is the government, following in the footsteps of other governments like Denmark and South Korea, who are embracing, a plant forward plan. And a just transition for farmers alongside that. And obviously, as it goes without saying that moving away from intensive farming would spare many millions of animals from terrible suffering. So that's one really big priority. We've got another sort of theme, I guess, around importing cruelty, which we've had disappointment from the current government and kind of saying one thing on trade and then doing another, quite the opposite. So we want to see mandatory welfare standards, sort of red lines in our trade deals, which mean that our welfare standards aren't watered down and our farmers aren't undercut by low welfare imports. That's really, really key. And in the same vein, we want to see the next government stopping the importation of products that would be deemed too cruel to produce in the UK. So things like fur and foie gras, battery eggs. If these things are too cruel to produce here, then why are we paying, why are we commissioning that cruelty from overseas? It doesn't make sense. So that's another theme. We've got a whole big theme around protecting British wildlife. So within that, we've got some really big issues that have been a major problem and quite a political problem for a long time for this government. So strengthening the Hunting Act is a big ask for us in coalition with the Time for Change coalition. Ending the ineffective badger cull, working with farmers to find cattle-focused means of eradicating bovine TB is another really important one. Some things around trapping. It'd be great to move on at some point to think about the extensive use of poisons in the UK. That the regulatory environment for that is very weak, and banning the use and sale of snares as well. And then we've got the issue of extending maximum sentences for wildlife cruelty offences. So at the moment, we have this kind of two-tier system where animals under human control, cruelty offences to animals under human control can receive up to 5 years in prison, whereas wild animals only 6 months, and that's doesn't make any sense whichever way you look at it. So we'd like the maximum sentence for wildlife cruelty offences extended, and we'd also like wildlife crimes reported. We'd like them to be notifiable so that we can actually understand these crimes, where they're happening, what's causing them, and links with other crimes as well, which is an area I know you're really familiar with and doing great work on, Paula. So big laundry list. And then of course final big area, which I won't go into loads of detail on, is a goal and a time frame towards animal-free science and research, which we really need the government to be proactive and lead the way on that for all of the all of the stakeholders that are involved in making it happen.
That is a really huge list.
It is a bit, isn't it? Yeah.
But what I see, what I've seen increasingly, is the sector coming together and working really collaboratively, which gives hope that actually pulling together many of these asks can actually be achieved now.
Yeah, we hope so, for sure. And I think lots of these things DEFRA has been doing work on for, in some cases, years. So it's not like this is a completely new unknown suite of problems and challenges. And indeed the solutions are out there as well, particularly with respect to things like the badger cull. and strengthening the Hunting Act, we know exactly what needs to be done. It's just the political will, to get it done. And so an election could, sort of give us a fresh start and get some new energy and initiative to get some of these solutions in place.
And talking of political will, last year was obviously disappointing because the Kept Animals Bill was dropped with the promise that individual issues would be progressed. Now, I noticed in the King's speech that only one of those issues, and that's the ban on the export of live animals for fattening and slaughter, was announced. But what are other issues, such as the keeping of primates as pets, import restrictions on welfare grounds for other animals, and dog abduction? Have we seen any movement there?
Yeah, we have. I mean, I think you're right to say that the government sort of pressing the self-destruct button on the Kept Animals Bill was a real low for animal welfare, and I think that across the sector we really felt acutely let down and betrayed. And I think it was especially galling, that we know from a letter that was sent from then Environment Secretary Therese Coffey to Conservative MPs. The explanation that the government gave for dropping the bill was that it was to avoid amendments probing on difficult areas for the Conservative Party, so i.e. hunting with dogs. And that as an explanation for binning this big bill, which contained, I think it was 3 or possibly even 4 manifesto commitments, was really quite mind-boggling, particularly for a government that's got a 50+ seat working majority. So yeah, that was a bit of a low point, and certainly not an efficient or really a respectful use of parliamentary time to get that far in that bill and then bin it. But with all that behind us, yes, the government has brought forward the live export bill, and we have legislative sort of vehicles for some of the other areas that were in the Kept Animals Bill. So the government's brought forward a statutory instrument on primates as pets. Their press release says actually a ban on primates as pets, but it's actually a licensing requirement. So that's a little bit cheeky, maybe it's not quite the right word, but I mean it's certainly creative, let's say, language, because it's not a ban, and we're not best pleased with that, really, because it really kind of creating licensing sort of perpetuates and legitimizes the idea that these animals are suitable to be kept as pets, which they're very, very clearly not. And the SI we are concerned about, because much like the disastrous decision and implementation of the addition of XL bullies to the Dangerous Dogs Act, the primate SI doesn't look at the impact that this law will have. So we're concerned at the potential that potentially hundreds of primates could be surrendered by owners who can't keep them. And where do these animals go? And it again be could be left to rescues to pick up the pieces, which isn't acceptable.
No,
there's other concerns as well with it, to do with lots of things that the regulations need to clarify. So yeah, it's better than the current situation, but it should have gone a lot further, which is disappointing. Yeah. And then on the other areas you mentioned, we've got progress as well, again via private members' bills. So Anna Firth and Selene Saxby have both got ballot bills. Anna's got one on dog theft, and Selene's got one on restricting the importation of cats and dogs and ferrets. So that's great, and we've got everything crossed, in the hope that these bills get through in time in what's going to be a short parliamentary session. But ultimately, it's still disappointing, because it shouldn't be up to MPs to carry the responsibility, really, for passing, manifesto commitments from the government.
Yes, no, I agree with you. Good news too about the proposed ban on the export of live animals for slaughter and fattening. Had massive public support. I know we were talking earlier about public opinion. This one's been on the radar of the public for a long time now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great that it's come back. It's been resurrected as a single issue bill. And we take our hats off to our colleagues at the RSPCA and Compassion in World Farming who've literally been campaigning for this for decades. So it's a very, very long overdue piece of legislation. It's a really opportune moment for it because might sound a bit counterintuitive, but there are currently no live exports going from Great Britain of animals for slaughter or fattening. So it's a really good moment to bring in the ban because there's no opposition. There's no one who's going to be immediately, affected economically by it. We look back to the 1990s, there were, I think it was in excess of 2 million animals that were being exported each year on these awful, cruel, long live export journeys, confined, cramped in tiny spaces, often without adequate water or breaks or food. Then we had mad cow disease, prevented the trade for a while, and then when it resumed between, I think it was 2010 and 2020, it was sort of in the thousands of animals, tens of thousands of animals that were exported. So it's only a sort of quirk of Brexit to do with technicalities around border control posts that has stopped the trade since Brexit, and it could easily resume again. So this is the absolutely the best moment to bring it in, and we're delighted it's passed all its stages in the House of Commons. I think it was last week, and now we're looking for a very swift passage through the House of Lords, and hopefully with no amendments.
No, fingers crossed on that one. And another disappointment last year was the hunting trophies import prohibition bill. And that was a real disappointment that it didn't complete its passage through Parliament. So do you see any more hope on the horizon for 2024?
Yeah, that was another low point. And that was really underhand tactics used in the House of Lords designed to wreck Henry Smith MP's private members bill. It was the government did back it, but ultimately it was actually Lords from their own Conservative benches who derailed it and wrecked it. So that was massively disappointing. We do now have hope in this session with another ballot bill, but from John Speller, who's a Labour MP, who has just, in fact, this week published a bill. It's identical to Henry Smith's bill. And that will have its second reading in the Commons on the 22nd of March. The government has yet to announce whether it will back it, but given that it's exactly the same as Henry's bill, it would be kind of odd if it didn't. So now we look again to the House of Lords, to see what their response will be to this bill coming, a second time around. And if they have the kind of nerve, to defy the government, their own party in the House of Commons and public opinion again, and we very much hope that they won't, and that it will pass into law this time.
Well, it'd be fantastic to see that become law. A really important piece of legislation. Claire, we've concentrated a lot on the asks that we have for 2024, and some of those are longer term aims, but is there anything in terms of your long-term vision for animals or animal policy in the UK that we haven't covered that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, there is something we've been giving some thought to and sort of putting it in front of the people who are holding the manifesto pens. And that's the idea of an animal welfare strategy and potentially an animal welfare commissioner. And the idea sort of follows on from the action plan that was published by the government in 2021, which was great, and we celebrated at the time that it had quite a good suite of ambitions to improve animal welfare protection under then Secretary of State George Eustace. But it had a few sort of fatal flaws. There was no sort of time frame for delivery. There was no accountability mechanism to monitor progress or report to Parliament. And it just really turned into a kind of quite a sort of glossy brochure exercise of, claims that, we're a world leader in animal welfare at every corner. But at the end of the day, it's kind of delivered, a fairly modest and fragmented legislative change for animals, and hasn't been joined up across government, as we've seen with departments like Department for International Trade, who've kind of gone in the opposite direction on animal welfare and clearly haven't read this action plan. So yeah, we really would like to get to a point where the government's plans to improve animal welfare are sort of cohesive and transparent, and there's accountability, and that we get beyond just warm words and have really clear action and a strategy for action. So we think that the appointment of an animal welfare commissioner to oversee and sort of deliver on an animal welfare strategy could be a really good move for that, and that if it sort of sat at cabinet office level rather than DEFRA, it could help a kind of cross Whitehall approach to thinking about animal welfare. And that, it could, as we discussed earlier, we've got a long kind of laundry list of issues, and we know that government time is limited. We know that not everything can be done all at once. Yeah. So a strategy would would facilitate a kind of meaningful prioritization of government time, and enable, open and transparent collaboration with key stakeholders, including, of course, the devolved administrations. In many cases, they are doing, leaps and bounds ahead of Westminster on animal welfare. And, a commissioner could give independent advice to government, as is the case, in many other areas like environmental protection. So, yeah, that's something we've been giving some thought to, and hoping that with, with a general election, we can sow that seed and hopefully have a cohesive and ambitious strategy for animals in the next parliamentary term.
Oh gosh, well, I mean, all of this sounds so exciting, and the idea of a commissioner to actually help with strategy sounds a really interesting one. Claire, so glad that you're doing this work on behalf of the animals. And thank you for all you do and for talking to us today, because I think it's given us a really good sense of where we are and what we might be looking to going forward.
Oh, well, thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And likewise, you and the UK Centre for Animal Law team, we'd be lost without you. So it's always a pleasure to work with you. And thank you for all your amazing work as well.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Have a lovely day. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening from. And if you give us a good review, it will help others to find us. And don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss a show.
For more information about the work of the UK Centre for Animal Law, please go to www.alaw.org.uk.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's iroarpod.com.